or rather maybe a lengthy discussion on deformations. So, so we've been concentrating on motions based on the skeleton now, and we're going to transpose that into what we see as kind of final skeletal muscular motion on the skin. Um, Taking a look at a skin, just a real simple piece of geometry that we have covering our character. We've got all of our bones in there, and just throwing a really simple skin on it would give us something that might work pretty far away. The problem that we're going to run into is by using these joints alone, we're going to get essentially rotational influences all throughout the body. When you actually look at how the skin surface on something is going to deform, you're going to see, due to the linear nature of how the muscles pull and how the skin is going to pull across those muscles, you really don't want things to rotate. A lot of times you want your skin to translate around. You want to turn that rotational action into a translational action. A lot of times people will accomplish this by using, muscle systems or other ways to abstract what's going on. But I usually find it much more efficient to actually do a direct skinning method, but create extra influences in there that are driving in the direction in which I want to actually pull the skin. So I have on this just a really simple skin setup where I've just skinned to the bones that I have here. I've got I've got a shoulder. Got the shoulder here, I've got the upper arm, and I've got a chest on both sides, and that's the extent of what I have. So we'll look at some of the issues that we have with what this is doing. First off, an animation note: your arm doesn't ever really raise above the plane of your shoulder. Anything beyond that is actually your shoulder motion. So if you have people bending, the arms backwards up, way beyond the shoulder or something like this, that is inaccurate. I don't know of any creature that actually does that to that degree. You're going to be able to move your arm up to about here, then motions beyond that are taken up by your shoulder. So one thing to look at is, be realistic about the range of motion that you're trying to achieve. There are situations in more cartoony characters where you're going to need to, achieve a great range of motion, but a lot of times you can get away with things in the motion blur and then speed because of that great motion. But in many cases, you just need to, when you're sticking to or building your character out for the range of motion that the character would go in, you'll end up with something that's going to work, 90-95% of the time, and you can get it done fairly quickly. And part of that could be just an education point with you and the people that are actually doing the animation, is making sure that what you're delivering to them is going to suit their needs. Okay, so back to this. A couple of things that we see, where we're getting wings here, kind of where the lats would go up into the armpit because of the rotational influence of our shoulder and our arm that we wanted to blend in through our chest. And you're also seeing, we can see this easier in a shaded mode with the wireframe. You can see the entire area across the pecs is also kind of, this area is rotating around, and this area doesn't really fall off a whole lot, so we're not seeing that, that vertical pull that we get from the pec being connected up under the delt. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to add extra influences in here, but we're going to determine how they move in a more linear fashion. So let's see, the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create some joints and then constrain them into our system. Okay, so it's going to create a joint here. We're just going to create something to, I'm going to start with the lat area here. So we're going to create something right here, and we're going to move this, in the direction of our spine. We're going to actually put this, going to parent that to our our chest. And one of the nice things about using something solely as in a translational sense is that its position doesn't really matter. If you're not pivoting or rotating and you're just pulling, it doesn't matter, if I'm translating up and down there, or if I'm translating up and down here, or if I'm up here and I'm translating up and down. I'm still doing a pull. The exact position of the pull doesn't really matter. So basically we can kind of position, our joints wherever it's going to make sense for us to help visualize it. And the thing that's important is the direction in which it's pulling. And so we're going to get that from two things. One, we're going to get its initial direction from its parent. So we're kind of inheriting everything from the parent. I'm going to go in and make visible our joint orients. So we can kind of see how they line up. And we're all zeroed in, and I'm just going to call this, my lats joint, something like that. Okay, so we've got this here, and I always like to have something zeroed out. So I'm going to place this over here, and that's, where, makes sense to me for pulling on our lats. And then I'm just going to duplicate it and parent it underneath the first one. So I basically now have two joints sitting at that position. I'm going to rename one as the parent. And that's the joint. And that's so I can get it nice and zeroed out. So this first parent joint, I'm going to actually go in and lock it, so I know it's not going to move. And then we're going to do all of our motion right here on this joint. Okay, so we've got it locked, so the orientation is going to follow whatever the chest is doing. Since our chest is the dominant factor for this region, we want pretty much the area of the armpit and the lat here to kind of follow with what the chest is doing. So if the chest is going this way and we're pulling around the rib cage, we want our translation to go that way too. The next thing we want to look at is, okay, so what are we going to drive this thing by? Well, I want to drive this thing up and down based on the motion of our shoulder. So as our shoulder moves up and down, I want to drive our extra joint moving up and down. So we'll go into our relaxed position here. I'm actually going to go in and for now unlock these so I can reset the 0 point. And I'm going to point constrain the object to the end of the shoulder. So I'll go to my shoulder and walk down to the end of the shoulder. Because I have a beginning and an end to pretty much all what I consider an independent system. And I will select my parent there, and I'm going to create a point constraint. And then so I'm going to select the end of my shoulder, and then I'm going to select my parent joint, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a point constraint to get it to move to where I want it to be. So okay, so now I have something that's based on the position of the shoulder. I'm just going to delete that point constraint, and now I'm going to go in and have the motion actually on this one. So I'm going to recreate that point constraint. So I'm going to recreate it from the shoulder end to my joint. Created my point constraint. So now I can see when this moves, I've got that moving. So to get it to do what I want to move in a linear fashion, there's two ways I can do it. One, I can limit the point constraint to only affect the axis in which I want it to move. So if we go to our attribute editor, we can display our local axis. Essentially, I only want it to be able to move in Y. So I have the opportunity to go in and modify the constraint, but since I don't like to change connections or delete connections, mainly because I know this rig could be referenced in later, what I usually end up doing is going in and actually working on the limits. So I'll go in and I'll set translation limits so that I'll leave it open in Y, but I'll set the X and the Z to be 0. So I've got my full constraint active. I've got all of my channels there in case I wanted to do something different with them later. But I basically just set these limits so that what I now get is an object which is just going to translate based on the rotation of my shoulder. Now that I've got that, I can use this as a new influence on my skin. So let's just put this back in our bind pose real quick and go to our edit smooth skin, add influence, lock the weights. I usually like to add my new joint set weight to 0 so I don't have Maya screw everything up by trying to figure out what it wants to do, which is usually not what I want it to do. So now I'll go in and I've got my new object added, and if I go into the erase position and start painting this in lightly, I'll see I get this nice vertical translation in here. And what I can do is I can start, as I'm adding this into the mix, I can start pulling out the previous influences that were more rotational. So I can go into the shoulder influence that I had, and I can actually remove it. I will be a little more heavy-handed with removing it here. Now the key is you're going to want to blend this in, because in the areas down here where the shoulder doesn't directly affect the skin, this is where we want to have our vertical pull. But in the areas up here, it actually is directly affected by the shoulder joint. That's where we're going to want to keep that rotational drive. So we're just going to go in and on the under parts and the sides here, we're going to paint out what used to be affected by our shoulder. And we'll probably go in and change some of the stuff that used to be affected by our arm a little bit as well. And then we'll go in and changing now back to the lat. Painting the lat back in just a little bit. I usually end up painting with a low opacity on my brush, and then just kind of layering it in and just kind of being soft with it. Now we'll just smooth this a little bit, kind of see what we get. So we're starting to get there. We can look at our upper arm influence, and maybe we'll want to pull this back a little bit. And then go back to our lats and start adding this in some more. So, and then you can play the endless waiting game, getting getting exactly what you want, how you want it, in the most reasonable amount of time. But again, we can take this kind of all the way through, the sides. So depending on your character, if you've got a character who's very barrel-chested and you want things very isolated, you can. But if you've got a character who, especially if you've got a character wearing a suit, a Spider-Man type of a thing, then you're really going to want to see, if you're trying to match an actual costume, you're going to want to see this stretch. And you can end up creating a pull that essentially only moves vertical but follows the verticality of each individual bone. So you can have one off of the mid torso that only moves up and down along it, and you could blend that back in. So as you create more and more influences, you'll see kind of what you're going to get as the final result. So this will take some waiting to get it to work right, but you can kind of see the basic thing and where this is rotating. And in this side, we do have much more of a translational result. And it's just going to take some time to get the weighting the way that we want. Other things to look at are, notice as the shoulder goes, is going up, our shoulder's going in. You can use something that drives in and out. I guess for this character, be along the x-axis of the chest in order to drive a depression in for the armpit, and then make that pec really stick out. So there are all sorts of things that you can do for that. So having these single axis motions are really useful. But let's move on to another technique for simulating kind of a muscle on the skin. So let's reset really quick and look at a scapula type rig.